My people, today I speak to you about an incident that did not begin in the sky above Burkina Faso, but in the shifting balance of power across West Africa. When a Nigerian military aircraft crossed into our airspace without clearance, without communication, and without respect for protocol, we did not react out of emotion. We acted out of responsibility. Sovereignty is not a negotiation. It is a duty we owe to every citizen who trusts us to defend this land. Nigeria later spoke of a malfunction, perhaps. But those who understand regional politics know that nothing happens in isolation. When a nation moves with unusual speed beyond its borders, when silence replaces accountability, when certain external hands grow restless as new alliances rise, we must read events not as accidents but as signals. For too long, West Africa has lived under an order built on assumptions. Assumptions that some states could act freely while others stayed silent. That era is ending. The forced landing of that aircraft was not a provocation. It was a clear message. Burkina Faso will honor its sovereignty, and the Sahel will no longer accept security built on imbalance. On the morning that aircraft entered our skies, my commanders came to me with a message no leader ever treats as routine. An unannounced military transport was moving across our air corridor with no clearance code, no communication, and no explanation. In moments like these, hesitation is a luxury. I asked only one question: is this an emergency or is this a test? Their answer was simple. The aircraft behaved like neither. It followed no distress pattern. It made no request for assistance. It moved as if permission were guaranteed. In our region, that assumption carries a long history. For years, powerful states believed their actions could be explained later, justified later, or ignored entirely. Smaller nations were expected to absorb the consequences quietly. But the Sahel of today is not the Sahel of yesterday. We rebuilt our security doctrine with clarity. Any military movement over our territory must be known, approved, and accountable. When the C-130 ignored our calls, I knew the old habits had returned. Not from the people of Nigeria, whom I respect deeply, but from a mindset that has shaped West African politics for too long. The belief that sovereignty is flexible when convenience demands it. That belief is exactly what our alliance was formed to end. I ordered our air defense units to respond, calmly, professionally, without aggression, but without fear. The aircraft was redirected to Bobo Dioulasso because allowing it to proceed silently would have sent a dangerous message. If we overlook one breach, we invite the next. And if we signal uncertainty, we create space for those outside the region who have always benefited from West African disunity. When the aircraft landed and our forces secured the personnel on board, I felt no triumph. This was not a victory. It was a reminder. The Sahel is stepping into a new era where sovereignty must be lived, not spoken. And the moment we enforced our skies, I understood that this incident was only the beginning of a deeper conversation the region had been avoiding for years. Long before that aircraft touched our airspace, we in the Sahel had felt the ground shifting beneath West Africa. ECOWAS, once seen as a stabilizing platform, had drifted away from its founding principles. Decisions began to serve political interests rather than collective security. Some states acted with speed and force beyond their borders, yet moved with hesitation inside their own. Others relied on external voices to define their priorities. In that confusion, the burden always fell on the people, especially in the Sahel, who lived with the consequences. When Nigeria launched rapid strikes in Benin, the region witnessed something unusual. Aircraft took off before lawmakers even understood what was happening. Consultation vanished. Legal safeguards were bypassed, and ECOWAS, the body meant to guide the regional response, played no meaningful role. I saw clearly that the old order was cracking, not because Nigeria acted, but because no one could explain the urgency behind such speed. Inside Burkina Faso, this shift was not abstract. We had spent years rebuilding confidence after removing forces that treated our territory as a playground for foreign agendas. We had shaped a doctrine that prioritized sovereignty, not permission. And we had committed ourselves to defending that doctrine with discipline. So when an unannounced plane emerged on our radar, I did not view it as a harmless event. I viewed it through the pattern unfolding in the region. A pattern where unilateral action was becoming normalized and silence was being mistaken for acceptance. Some asked whether we should have waited, whether caution might have kept the situation calmer. But caution without clarity is the fastest path to vulnerability. The Sahel has learned this lesson repeatedly, often at great cost. The moment we assume good intentions without evidence is the moment we expose our people to risks we cannot undo. For me, the aircraft was not a symbol of conflict. It was a symbol of responsibility. And responsibility required one response: protect our airspace, enforce our sovereignty, and show the region that the Sahel will not operate under rules written by others. This is why our actions were firm, not hostile. Firm. When the C-130 crossed deeper into our airspace, my command room shifted from routine monitoring to active defense posture. Every officer understood what was at stake. We were not reacting to a malfunction. We were responding to uncertainty at a moment when uncertainty had already become a regional threat. Our air defense operators attempted contact again and again. Nothing. No distress call, no emergency declaration, no attempt to follow established procedures for military aircraft in trouble. A plane genuinely facing technical failure behaves differently, but this one moved with a confidence that suggested expectation, not accident. That was the moment I understood the deeper meaning. Someone believed Burkina Faso would hesitate. I refused to let that belief take root. I authorized the intercept units with a simple instruction: now guide the aircraft safely, but make it clear that our skies are not open corridors. My goal was never confrontation. My goal was clarity, and clarity is sometimes the most powerful form of deterrence. As the aircraft was redirected, I studied the flight path carefully. It told a story that words could not. The route made sense only if the aircraft expected to pass unnoticed. That single possibility carried more weight than the entire incident, because if someone somewhere assumed the Sahel had returned to passive compliance, then the region had misread us completely. When the plane landed and our forces secured the servicemen on board, we treated them with discipline and respect. They were not enemies. They were subjects of a violation we were obligated to investigate. But at the same time, I ensured our statement was immediate and direct. Silence allows narratives to be shaped by others. Quick clarity protects a nation from misinterpretation. Nigeria called it a technical concern. We responded with radar logs and protocol breaches. They sought calm, we sought truth, and in the space between those goals, the crisis transformed into something larger, a question of authority, duty, and the future of regional security. In that moment, I realized the plane had not caused the crisis. The crisis had simply revealed itself. When the aircraft touched the ground, many believed the incident had ended. But for me, that was the moment it truly began. A breach of sovereign airspace is not an isolated event. It is a test of cohesion, a measure of whether a nation and an alliance stands alone or stands together. Within minutes, I informed my brothers in Mali and Niger, not as a courtesy, but as part of the doctrine we built together. The alliance of Sahel states was not created to look strong on paper. It was created to act as one organism when any member faced uncertainty. And that day, Mali and Niger did exactly that. They elevated their air defense alert levels. They synchronized their radar networks with ours. They positioned mobile anti-air systems in key corridors. It was the first time our three nations executed this mechanism under real conditions, not simulations, and it worked. Some outside the region were surprised. They had assumed our alliance was symbolic or fragile. They believed distance, history, and different national pressures would weaken our coordination. They were wrong. What they misjudged was the unity forged through shared struggle, a unity born not from treaties, but from necessity. Our coordinated response removed the most dangerous assumption Nigeria had carried for years, the belief that the Sahel would always react individually. When nations react alone, they can be pressured. When they respond collectively, they reshape expectations. I also moved quickly on the narrative front. I instructed our leadership to issue our statement before Nigeria finalized its version, not to escalate, but to establish truth before speculation filled the vacuum. In geopolitics, the side that speaks first defines the terrain, and if we ceded that space, we would have ceded our sovereignty in the information battlefield. As our alert posture rose across all three countries, I felt something shift in West Africa. For the first time in decades, the old hierarchy cracked. The Sahel was no longer the region that absorbed decisions. We had become the region that set boundaries, and those boundaries were now visible to everyone, friends, rivals, and observers far beyond our continent. As we examined the incident, I reminded my commanders that a single aircraft rarely tells the whole story. It is the pattern around it that reveals intent, and in the months leading to the forced landing, the pattern across West Africa had become impossible to ignore. Nigeria's rapid strike in Benin was the first signal. Aircraft launched with unusual speed, no consultation, no regional coordination. Lawmakers received news of the attack almost at the same time the public did. And the institution meant to guide such decisions, ECOWAS, had no meaningful role. That level of unilateral action is not random. It reflects a state under pressure or a state responding to expectations it does not fully control. Then came the irregular flight movements near our borders, late hours, unclear purposes, actions that, on their own, could be dismissed as coincidence. But in geopolitics, coincidence has a rhythm. When events begin to align, a leader must ask the question others hesitate to voice. Is this clumsiness or choreography? Inside the Sahel, we saw what many refused to acknowledge. Some external actors, uneasy with the rise of our sovereignty-focused alliance, had begun repositioning themselves. They had lost influence in our territory. They had lost the ability to dictate security priorities as they once did. And whenever such powers lose ground, they do not retreat quietly. They look for new partners, new instruments, new avenues to reinsert themselves. I did not accuse Nigeria, but I could not ignore the possibility that Nigeria's sudden movements were shaped by forces beyond its borders. That possibility alone demanded vigilance. So when the C-130 entered our skies without clearance, we viewed it through the lens of everything that had recently unfolded, not as an isolated malfunction, but as part of a larger shift occurring beneath the surface of regional politics. I told my officers clearly, we are not responding to a plane, we are responding to a pattern. And patterns, once identified, must be confronted before they solidify into new norms that weaken our sovereignty. This is why our response was measured, immediate, and united. Because if we failed to act, we would have confirmed the assumption that the Sahel could still be navigated without respect. After the aircraft was secured and our alliance activated its defensive posture, I took a moment to reflect on what this incident truly exposed. It was not simply a breach of airspace. It was a mirror held up to West Africa, revealing two competing visions for our future. For decades, Nigeria stood as the unquestioned center of a regional security. Its size, economy, and military strength gave it a role no one contested. ECOWAS was built around that assumption. But the rise of the Sahel Alliance changed the equation. We did not seek confrontation. We sought dignity, sovereignty, and respect. Yet any shift in power, no matter how principled, is rarely welcomed by those accustomed to influence. Nigeria viewed the alliance as rigid. We viewed Nigeria's recent behavior as unpredictable. And when two sides believe they are defending stability, the risk of misunderstanding grows faster than anyone expects. I knew the world was watching. From Washington to Paris to Abuja, analysts were trying to determine whether this incident was a spark or a warning. They recognized something new. The Sahel was no longer reacting to events. We were shaping them. And when smaller nations begin to shape regional dynamics, it unsettles long-standing assumptions far beyond our borders. That is why our response had to be disciplined. If we acted with anger, we would justify every accusation that the Sahel was unstable. If we acted with weakness, we would invite further violations. So we chose the middle path, firm, lawful, transparent. Yet I must also speak honestly. West Africa cannot afford a future where military aircraft cross borders without clarity, where alliances fracture without dialogue, or where external interests pull strings behind the scenes. A region built on suspicion cannot prosper. A region built on respect can. Our forced landing of the C-130 was not meant to humiliate Nigeria. It was meant to remind every state, including the superpowers observing from a distance, that the Sahel has reclaimed its agency. And anyone engaging with us must do so with sincerity, not assumptions born from the past. My people, the incident with the Nigerian aircraft was not the climax of a crisis. It was the signal that West Africa has reached a turning point. The old order, built on assumptions and unequal expectations, can no longer guide our region. The Sahel has stepped into a new era where sovereignty is lived, defended, and enforced, not negotiated away for comfort or approval. But with sovereignty comes responsibility. We must remain disciplined, we must remain united, and we must remain vigilant against those who benefit from division, whether they stand inside our borders or far beyond them. I do not seek confrontation with any nation. I seek clarity, respect, and a future where no state acts as if others exist in its shadow. The forced landing of that aircraft was not an act of hostility, it was a declaration of our dignity. West Africa now chooses its path, and the Sahel will not walk backward.